gentlemen, and Ellie for hosting this event, and all the co-chairs, and Tim Huckleberry for beautiful, beautiful music, and his voice from heaven, and all of you for coming out, and all the volunteers who helped us as well. And you know, I guess the answer to Basil's question, I'm gonna kind of speculate, because but what we're seeing in the polling is that that I'm winning among all Americans under 45 years old. I'm winning among independent voters, which is now the biggest party. It's the big unaffiliated voters for the first time this year of any election in American history are outnumbered both Republicans and Democrats. And so the question is, why are those people supporting me? And I think it's two reasons. But one of them is that those are the people who are listening to podcasts. Those are the people who are listening to all formats. And the cohort that I do worst with are baby boomers who ought to be the most fervent supporting me, because they're people who remember Camelot and the Kennedy administration, and they're people, generally speaking, who are big on the environment. And but they really have not heard from me in 18 years, because I've been censored not by the government, but by the corporate media for 16 years, 17 years, and in the last 3 years I've been censored actually by the government. And we know that because of the Twitter files and because of Missouri versus Biden, which released all these discovery documents that showed that 37 hours after he took the oath of office, President Biden's White House was communicating with Twitter, with Facebook, with the mainstream media, and with the other social media sites, asking them to remove me from broadcast and from platforms. And so most people haven't heard from me, but that older cohort, I asked my son, I have a 28-year-old son, Connor, and I asked him the other day, I said, have you ever seen a network news show from beginning to end? And he said, no. Well, you have a whole generation of kids who are going to alternative sources, and it's actually, to me, very, very encouraging. Because I always criticize my kids because they're part of this generation that is just swipe right. As soon as anything loses intensity after seconds, they try to find something. But they all have very short attention spans. And yet they'll sit for 3 hours and listen to a Joe Rogan podcast or a Bobby Marcus, and they're very, very well informed because of that. But they're hearing alternative sources of news. And so they've heard my interviews, and that, I have this extraordinary, the poll that came out yesterday, the Quinnipiac poll, showed me a month ago, that same poll showed me at 38 points with people under 35 years. And this poll yesterday shows me at 40, so I've gained 2 points in a month. The other major polls on New York Times, CNN, and Harvard-Harris poll show me at 20, up to 27 points in Michigan, in some of the 5 battleground states. I average 24, but I'm at 27 in Michigan. All I need, technically, is 34 to win the election. So I'm within single digits of being in a position, because it's winner take all. So theoretically, if the other two candidates got 33 each and I got 34, I win the election. And I have 11 months. Nobody for 100 years, no independent candidate since Teddy Roosevelt has been this strong, this far in advance of the election. And I have, like I say, I have 11 months, so And what we need to do during those 11 months is to reach those baby boomers, all the old people. We need to get, raise your hand. We need to teach them to look at podcasts. And, we need to get them technologically savvy, and then win the election. And the other reason I think I'm doing well with young people is because I'm the only candidate that's talking about the real issue for our country.
Yes, sir.
Which is, how are we going to get our kids into homes?
Woo! Yes.
And out of our own homes. I have 7 kids. And the eldest one is 39, and he's in a home. I have 6 between 20 and 30, and all of them went to literally the best schools in this country, and they have good jobs, and not one of them thinks that they has any path toward getting into a home. And you have a whole generation of kids. I grew up with the central promise in the American dream was that if you worked hard, if you played by the rules, you could finance a home, you could raise a family, you could take a summer vacation and put something aside for your retirement on one job. And there's nobody in this generation who believes that promise applies to them. I don't know any of my friends, any of my kids' friends, who are even thinking about getting into a home. They're all struggling with paying back their debt, and they feel betrayed by our generation. We told them if you go to college, everything's going to be okay, and it's not okay. They have no idea how they're going to make ends meet. And there was a poll that came out in 2013 that asked people who were under 35, 18 to 35, are you proud of the United States of America? And 85% said yeah. This was in 2013. The same poll last month, 18% said yes. So somehow during the administrations, the last 2 presidents, this entire generation of kids has lost their faith in our country, their pride in our country, and mainly because they have no hope for their own future. They feel the promise has been broken to them, and it has. And we let them down. And, I tried, in 2019, I lived in San Francisco for most of the year. I was trying the 3 Monsanto cases, one after the other. And then after the third one we won. The first one we won $289 million. The second one we won $89 million. The third one we won $2.2 billion. And then Monsanto came. We had my little group of lawyers had 2,200 cases of home gardeners who'd gotten non-Hodgkin's lymphoma from using Roundup. But altogether we had about 10,000 cases at that time. And the way you do it is you try it one at a time until they come to the negotiating table, and they came after that third verdict. I went to the gym every day before court in Union Square, which in San Francisco is like Fifth Avenue in New York. All of the big, foreign brands are there: De La Valle, Prada, Gucci, Ferragamo, Burberry, and all the big American brands like Nordstrom's, Macy's, Bloomingdale's, Gap, Old Navy, Levi's, etc. And everybody goes to San Francisco to go shopping there. And I went back a month ago, and all of those stores are now shut. It's just acre after acre of plywood. It's heartbreaking. And I was shocked. And I started doing research on homelessness, and the first thing I found, there's 525,000 homeless people in our country, but half of them are in California.
Yeah.
So why is that? My assumption was it's drug addiction, that homelessness is caused by drug addiction, it's caused by mental illness, it's fed by that, it's fed by extreme poverty. And that a lot of the people in San Francisco are homeless came from out of state. So they become homeless in Detroit, and then they say, well, I'd rather be in the good weather. I don't want to sleep in the grate in the snowstorm. So they spend their last couple bucks going to San Francisco, or they're shipped to San Francisco by people in Dallas, the police, when they arrest them, they put them on a bus. That which is what people in San Francisco told me. I'd say, why is there so many homeless here? Oh, because when they arrest a homeless person in Dallas, they put them on a Greyhound with a one-way ticket to San Francisco. Oh, this is what, these are the things, the biases that I went in, and my son, Connor, actually introduced me to this writer called Matthew Desmond, who is has done all the seminal works on homelessness. He's written a book called Evicted, and he had a team from the University of San Francisco who went out and he interviewed all the homeless people, thousands of them in San Francisco. And what he says in this book, what he shows, is that homelessness is not related to, is not a drug addiction is not a major driver. There's places with much larger drug addiction, West Virginia, Detroit, and much higher levels of poverty. But they don't have big homelessness problems. And it's not mental illness. What he shows is that a lot of homeless people are mentally ill, but they become mentally ill after they become homeless. And after only 3 days on the sidewalk, your psyche begins to disintegrate. So, and what he also shows is that almost all of the homeless people in San Francisco are from San Francisco. They became homeless in San Francisco. And he shows in this book, and in a lot of podcasts and everything, where, very, very riveting guy, that the single critical driver of homelessness is housing prices. And San Francisco is the highest housing price in the country. LA, the average home is $800,000, which means you have to be making $250,000 to afford a house. And what Desmond shows, this epidemic of homelessness that is now destroying our state, is building like a tsunami and is about to roll across the country and bring with it all of that financial destruction and the cultural and social disintegration that we're seeing on the streets of San that are just wrecked the city. The chaos on those streets in San Francisco is breathtaking. And it's because housing prices are going up, and everything's going up, but nothing's going up like housing prices. And why is that happening? Well, there's a bunch of reasons, but one of the primary drivers is, one is inflation because we paid $8 trillion for the forever wars in the last 20 years. Another $8 trillion for COVID. It got nothing for either of those expenditures. So that is driving inflation. But housing is going up much higher than anything. And one of the primary drivers of that is that you have a handful of giant corporations. Fidelity is one, but mainly BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, the biggest corporations in history, that are buying up single family. Those three companies own 89% of the S&P 500. And they've now targeted American agricultural land and residential housing. I got the Washington Post got mad at me a couple of weeks ago saying, because I was talking about BlackRock buying all that single family homes, and they said BlackRock doesn't even buy single family homes, which is true. BlackRock owns Blackstone, which buys the single family homes. And by the way, BlackRock owns Vanguard and State Street as well. So they all own each other. So it's really this one big cartel. And we're already seeing this poverty around, and they now own about almost 6% of the housing stock in the country, but the trajectory is that by 2030, within 6 years, 40 to 60% of single-family homes are going to be corporate owned. So that, even those little incremental parts are already driving up the housing prices. And we're seeing also, I'm running against two presidents who both are running on a platform that they brought extraordinary prosperity to our country. But when I travel around the country, and you sit at kitchen tables with people, they feel like they're being gaslighted when you say that to them. And they're saying, right now in this country, the average income is $5,000 less than the cost of basic human needs, of food, transportation, and housing. So that means that if you buy the basic necessities, and that's not even good food, it's not the food you get at Whole Foods. It's the carrots that you need to eat 8 of them today to get the same nutrition that you would get 20 years ago from one. And they're loaded with glyphosate and atrazine and neonicotinoids and all this other, chemicals that are driving this chronic disease epidemic in our country. And so you get the end, more than half our country, the average person buying the basic necessities is $5,000 in debt at the end of the year. And how are they handling that? They're putting it on their credit cards. And last month, we hit a milestone of $1 trillion in credit card debt. In 3 years, it's increased by $330 billion. Oh, it is like a meteor. And the credit card companies are paying 22%, are charging 22% interest. If the mafia did that, it would be called loan sharking, they go to jail. I saw a fisherman send me a screenshot of his credit card bill last week. It was 37%. But Visa, MasterCard, Wells Fargo, Citibank, Chase, it's business as usual. And who do you think owns every one of those companies?
BlackRock, State Street,
Vanguard. And they're driving, they're strip mining the wealth and the equity from the American people. We saw during the pandemic, they closed 3.3 million businesses. President Trump and President Biden, during a lockdown that lasted 500 days through both administrations, they created $1 billion a day. And they shifted $4 trillion north into those pockets. It was a zero-sum game, away from the American middle class. They closed all these businesses. The local retailers, many of them will never reopen. 41% of black-owned businesses will never reopen. And, these were the businesses that were paying local taxes here. You guys all know somebody who lost a business. These are businesses. I grew up in Mount Kisco, New York. I spent my life there. Those were the businesses, those local retailers. They paid local taxes. They hired my kid for summer vacation. They had the plaques on their walls of appreciation from the local Boy Scout troop. They were paying for my kids' hockey jerseys. They were paying for their Little League uniforms. And today they're gone. And Amazon is still open. And we all got a 3-year lesson on how to use Amazon. But, when Amazon was censoring my book, criticizing, I'm in litigation right now, criticizing the closures, the lockdowns. And so they got to close all their competitors and silence people who were criticizing that policy. Oh, they were minting billions of dollars. And, and they closed these local retailers. I paid more money at the local retailer. But that money was recirculating in our community and benefiting and enriching all of our lives. And Amazon's not paying local taxes, but at least they're paying federal taxes, right?
Nope.
No. Last year, 0. So they're doing it right in front of us. And, then we're giving $113 billion we committed in March to the Ukraine war. A war that should never have happened. A war that Putin has repeatedly tried to settle. And we know last week, the Israeli Prime Minister at that time, Naftali Bennett, came clean in a speech and told the whole story of what happened in April 2022. And the chief Ukrainian negotiator said, yeah, we signed a peace agreement. The Israelis and the Turks, because we wouldn't help. Zelensky negotiated. The Israelis and the Turks agreed to negotiate it. They signed an agreement that would have left Donbass and Lugansk part of, all that Putin wanted was us to agree to keep NATO out of Ukraine. It was the one thing he wanted. And Zelensky gave it to him. He signed the agreement. Putin was withdrawing the troops. President Biden sent Boris Johnson, the British Prime Minister, over there to force Zelensky to tear up the agreement. And we've killed 500,000 Ukrainian kids since then. My son fought over there with the Foreign Legion, and the people that he was fighting for, virtually all of his squadron are now dead. Oh, thank God he came back into this country. He's back here. But when Mitch McConnell was asked in March, the same month, we committed $113 billion to Ukraine. We cut 30 million Americans from food stamps and 15 million Americans from Medicare. And the Fed printed $300 billion since March of 2022, twice what we're giving to Ukraine to bail out the Silicon Valley Bank. So when the bankers need it, when the military contractors need it, the doors to the safe are wide open. But when Americans are hungry, when they are sick, when they need a helping hand, the doors slam shut. And Mitch McConnell was asked in March, the same month that we committed all this, he was saying he was asked by a reporter on national TV, so Republicans are supposed to care about the national debt. We're now $33 trillion that we're loading on our children's backs. And he said, can we really afford to send $113 billion to Ukraine? The entire budget for EPA is $12 billion. That's all we have for the environment in this country. We're sending 113, and since then we've done another 21 billion. And Biden's asking for another 61 billion now. So they asked Mitch McConnell, can we afford this? And he said, don't worry, because it's not really going to Ukraine. It's going to U.S. military contractors. It's going to Raytheon, McDonnell Douglas, Northrop Grumman, Boeing, and Lockheed. Who do you think owns every one of those companies? They're doing it, and I'll say one last thing. Tim Scott, during the Republican debate, was asked the same question. He said a different answer. He said, don't worry, because the money to Ukraine is not actually a gift. It's a loan. So raise your hand if you think that loan is getting paid back. Nobody does. And that's why they call it that. But why do they call it a loan? Because they know nobody's fooled. They call it a loan because if you call it a loan, you can impose loan conditions. And what are those loan conditions? Well, the principal one is that Ukraine has to put all of its government-owned assets and all of its agricultural lands onto a land market and sell them to multinational corporations. The Ukrainian farmland is the largest asset, single financial asset in Europe. It's the breadbasket of Europe. There's been 1,000 years of wars fought over that land. 500,000 kids have died trying to keep that land under Ukraine possession. They did not know about this loan agreement. The loan agreement forces Ukraine to create a land market and sell all of its agricultural land. 30% of it has already been sold. Here's who bought it. DuPont, Cargill, and Monsanto. Who do you think owns every one of those companies? BlackRock. So they're doing it right in front of us. And they know they don't care that we know it anymore. But they know they can get away with it because they have a system for disabling us from doing anything about it. And what is that system? It's keeping us all hating on each other. Keeping us all, Republicans and Democrats, black and white, at each other's throats. And when the king and queen go out on the balustrades of their castle, and they see all their subjects fighting each other, they go back to the banquet hall and they pop champagne corks, because they know nobody's coming over the wall to take back what they've stolen. And what I said when I declared 7 months ago in Boston is that I'm not going to participate in that vitriol, in that polarization. I'm going to focus. I'm going to focus on identifying the values that we all share in common, rather than focusing on these little tiny issues that keep us all apart. And what I found over the last 7 months is that those landscapes, the things that Americans agree on, are much, much bigger. Everybody wants to take care of our veterans. Everybody wants us to have a good education system. Everybody wants to end the chronic disease epidemic. Nobody wants the Mexican drug cartels running U.S. immigration policy and 7 million immigrants coming into this country without any kind of, with the mafia running the whole thing. Everybody wants to end the corrupt merger of state and corporate power. Everybody wants to end this predatory relationship that our regulatory agencies now have with the American public. Oh, and those are the things I'm focusing on my message, the message that appeals to all Americans who want to reach this. And what you're doing for me tonight is giving me the wherewithal to reach them. The Biden campaign and the Trump campaign will each have about $2 billion. And that's a lot of money. I've only spent $15 million, but I'm already within single digits of beating them. I don't need a lot of money. I need people, and I need a little. So thank you for what you've given me tonight, and I will open it up for questions. Thank you all very much.
So the first question was, why do you think Mr. Kennedy has gained so much popularity? You gave an answer. My answer in my mind was COVID. With COVID, people's eyes and ears and their feelers went up. Like, what's happening here with the government? Like, why are we being forced with this vaccine? Like, what is this virus? So people have started becoming a little suspicious towards the government and why they're mandating certain things and just in general. That's my theory on, I don't know what percentage, but I feel like that would be a big percentage of why people got interested in you as well. Do you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I was, for 18 years, I've been characterized by the mainstream media, which gets the mainstream news, news shows get about 75% of their advertising revenue, even evening news shows, from pharmaceutical companies, and so they were, who were dictating content on them, making sure that I didn't speak, but that I'm mischaracterized. Most Americans thought, oh, he's a crazy person, he's anti-vax, vaccines save millions and millions of lives, anybody who's anti-vax is crazy. I'm not anti-vax, but they characterize me as that. And as a nut and quack and anti-science, and if you only look, if I lived in that information bubble where I was only looking at CNN and MSNBC and reading the New York Times, I'd have a very low opinion of myself. But what COVID did is it started people looking because they saw, oh, the government is lying to us. The mainstream media is lying to us. We have to now go to alternative sources and actually check their story. And so many more Americans did that. And I think that's exactly right. And when they did that, some of them realized that actually what I was saying was, scientific. I've won hundreds and hundreds of cases. I didn't do that by being a crazy person at juries.
I worked foreign counterintelligence for the FBI for many years. I spent GRU, KGB, all former Soviet. At the end of my career, we started spying Chinese. We have a China problem. The difference between the Russians or the former Soviet Union was they wanted to blow us up, obliterate us, take us out. The Chinese want to colonize us. They've had that theory for over 40 years, and we're buying into it. And the FBI is standing down against the Chinese. They're not doing anything. What do you think?
Yeah.
I mean, can we stop it?
I think that China wants to triumph in the global economy and global leadership. I don't think it wants to do that militarily. We spend about 4 times what China does on our military. China is 70th in the world right now in its per capita income. Oh, it's behind, countries like Serbia. It's it's poverty. The people are poverty stricken, and it wants to increase its stability is everything for them. They feel that they have to build a middle class in that country, and they want to do that by controlling the world's resources. And they're doing a good job of it because they're competing by projecting economic power, not military power. China only has 1.5 bases abroad. We have 800. We've tried this experiment of projecting military power, and what it's done is it's bankrupted us, it's made us less safe. And what we ought to be doing is what my uncle wanted to do, which is to project economic power abroad. And right now, China is the principal creditor in virtually every nation in Latin America and almost every nation in Africa. We should be in that position. I'm not scared about competing with China on an economic playing field. I think we have, what Franklin Roosevelt called America's industrial genius. The freedom that we have in this country creates a ferment of entrepreneurial energy. And I think we're going to beat China every time if we compete with them economically. And that's how the whole world wants us to compete. I don't think China wants to go to Taiwan. China holds it right. I mean, I stood at the border at Yuma between 2 o'clock and 4 o'clock in the morning 3 months ago. And I watched 300 people walk across the border, and only 2 of them were from Latin America. The first 110 that came over were all from West Africa, young men of military age. The second 2 buses, and their buses are all owned by the Mexican drug cartels, were assembled. They all knew exactly what was going to be. They're recruiting people all over Asia, all over Africa, using TikTok and YouTube. And they tell them exactly, pay $10,000 to $15,000 a piece, and we will get you into the United States. They come across the border. Border Patrol fingerprints them. If they don't have a criminal record, the Border Patrol takes them within 72 hours to the Yuma airport and puts them on an airplane to any destination or country that they choose. They have an asylum court date that is 7 years in the future. And anybody who wants can walk across the border to get that. Nobody is stopped. Literally, nobody is stopped. Yesterday, 14,000 people came across. And 7 million have come across in 3 years, and it's accelerated. And I interviewed 110 of them, and they were, as you said, the bulk of them were from China. They were from Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, Tibet, India, and the biggest cohort was China. And so, I think that this is a big national security risk for us, but it's also an economic risk. It's crushing our social service system. It's hurting the poor. During the last 2 decades of his life, I worked very, very closely with Cesar Chavez, who was one of my father's closest political allies. And Cesar had two big issues. One was pesticides, and I was working on him with those issues because Hispanic farm workers are disproportionately poisoned by pesticides. The other big issue he had, which consumed him, was border security. He wanted to close down the border because he saw that this open border was destroying, was flooding immigrants who were willing to work for unscrupulous employers who were paying them $3 or $4, $2 an hour. And it was dampening his leverage to get good wages and good conditions for legal workers. And that's what's happening right now. There are construction firms in New York that are paying $6 and $7 or $12 an hour, and they're unscrupulous, but they're bidding against union shops. And the union shops are losing the bids. And all that money is, it's not coming to working people in this country to build communities. And so we're all losing out on that. And they've got, Mayor Adams just announced cuts to the police force by 5%, cuts to fire by 5%, sanitation by 5% to pay for the migrants who are now camped out at Randall's Island on the playing fields. Our kids in New York couldn't play on those fields for 2.5 years. A lot of them were on scholarship trajectories. It ruined their lives. And now they can't play because it's been officially designated a migrant encampment. This is destroying our country. And it's easy to shut down. And I'm going to shut it down overnight when I get there.
Did you leave the Democrat Party or did it leave you? And
the second one.
And two is most of what you're talking about on the immigration is happening on a Democrat's watch. What's in it for the Democratic Party to have that happen?
I don't know. I don't know what's in everything organ. I do know one thing. I can't tell if there's some broader agenda, which is, none of it is explicable. And I spent a bunch of days down there meeting with the Border Patrol, meeting with local law enforcement, local farmers, a rape center that treats victims of child rape who are at the border because so many of them have been sexually abused. And these extraordinary people in Yuma, and their whole social service system has collapsed. The local hospital, I spent a half a day in the local hospital, and the head of the hospital says, we treat migrants just like we would treat local people here. They're the kindest people in the world, most generous. Really made me proud of our country. But he said last year we had $27 million in unreimbursed expenses from treating illegal migrants. And at one point we had 26 out of 27 beds in our maternity ward filled with illegal migrants, and we could not let women who had scheduled into birth inducements, after 9 months of pregnancy, they scheduled them, and they couldn't get them in because they were treated, all their beds were full. So this is destroying our country, and I don't know, I do know one thing. I know that there were about 27 gaps in the wall. And you can go down there and look at right now. And that were going to be filled, and it was called off the day that Biden came into the White House. He also tore up the towers. They had towers like Israel has. They had, motion detectors, and they had lights and video cameras and all these things. You don't need 2,200 miles of walls from San Diego to Brownsville, Texas, but you need, and a lot of it is wilderness that defends itself. But in the settled areas, you need a physical barrier, and then in the less settled areas, you need some kind of surveillance system. And we had that. And the Biden administration literally took down the towers and the lights. And you can see them in piles. You can also see these big piles, tens of millions of dollars of material that was supposed to finish the wall that was just called off right in the middle of construction. And so the local Border Patrol, the commander, Chief Clem, who's working, with my campaign now, left the Border Patrol that, helped me do this. And he said, he got Mayorkas to come down. He said, I was pleading with him, come down and watch what's happening. Finally, Mayorkas comes down, and I sees this torrent of humanity crossing the border. It's insane. And he said, okay, we'll complete the fence, but we're not going to use Trump materials. We're going to buy new stuff. It looks different. So they bought something that is a different color, and it's like a chain link fence, and it's less secure, and it doesn't go into the ground, which allows people to go under it. So I know that at least one element of what they're doing is just pettiness. It's just political pettiness. But I don't know if there's a larger agenda, and I never speculate about stuff that I don't know about. I can imagine stuff, as I'm sure you're thinking, but I'm not, I can't speculate about it. Yeah.
Thanks, Bobby. So I've got a hard one for you, or maybe a new one, but you're in a friendly crowd, so let's rehearse. You powerfully and rightfully talk about reforming federal agencies, the FDA, the CDC, the USDA, and possibly most difficult, the intelligence community. Unfortunately, whoever the president is, the civil service laws prohibit them from just going in there and firing whoever they want. So, how could you realistically fix these agencies?
It's a good question, but I've spent 40 years litigating against these agencies. I probably sued EPA more than any other attorney in the country. I've sued CDC, FDA, NIH, EPA. I've sued USDA multiple times. I've sued FCC. I just won a big suit in a Court of Appeals against the FCC for lying to the American public about cell phone radiation. So I've sued almost everybody. I haven't sued the Fed, which is a captive agency by Wall Street, or the intelligence. I know how to fix the intelligence. And it's the same thing that my uncle had a plan, which I have, and my father had a plan, and I know what it is. I'm happy to talk about it. And the person who runs my campaign, Amaryllis Fox, who's my daughter-in-law, is the smartest person I've ever met, and everybody says that about her after talking to her. But she spent her entire career as a clandestine agent in the intelligence service, and now she spent the last 17 years of her life fighting to dismantle the warfare state. So we do a lot of thinking, as you might imagine. If you know, I wrote a book called American Values that's about my family's 60-year fist fight with the CIA. And so I've given a lot of thought to how to fix that agency. But you don't need to fire people to fix the agency. You can move them around. I know the names in some of these agencies. I know the specific names of people who I'm going to move on day one. And I'm going to move them to jobs that, maybe they won't like. But, when you litigate against an agency, you get a PhD in agency capture and how to unravel. And I'll just give you one example. When I sued Monsanto, we found in discovery documents that the head of the pesticide division for over a decade, a guy at EPA, a guy called Jess Rowland, who at the beginning of our case, because he knew we had his name, he went on a road trip and could not be reached by a subpoena. And he was running the EPA pesticide division. What we found out from their emails that they handed over to us is these long, lengthy emails from the heads of Monsanto to Jess Rowland, telling him to fix studies, to stop studies, to create phony studies, to bring in these, crooked scientists we call biostitutes. to do studies, and they were running. Monsanto was running the pesticide division at EPA. Oh, with a lot of these agencies, I actually know the individuals. I can tell you who they are. I mean, Anthony Fauci's gone, but I can tell you who they are. I can tell you who they are at CDC. Frank DeStefano, Colleen Boyle. I will tell you their names. And they are people. But then there's also these perverse incentive systems at the agency that actually reward and put agency capture on steroids. And that's the most important thing, to dismantle that. And then to reorganize the institutional cultures at these agencies so they begin to serve the public again, rather than keeping in this posture as a predator against the American public while they advance the mercantile interests of the corporations they're supposed to be regulating.
Mr. Kennedy, I'm 22 years old. I'm part of that generation with the short attention span you were talking about. I look around at my friends my age, my fellow young men, and we're in crisis. You can read Richard Reeves' book, Boys and Men, to get some intel about this, but we're dropping out of university like crazy. Right now it's 60% female, 40% male in university for the first time in history. We're dropping out of the workforce. A lot of us are addicted to, you name the vice, video games, drugs, pornography. It's really bad. And I want to know, what's your message to people, specifically young men my age, as you head into this presidency?
Well, I mean, the main thing is to give back a sense of purpose, a sense of faith and hope in our country, a sense that there's hope in your lives, that you're going to be able to get a job and get a house. And, I have a plan to create a 3% mortgage for people your age that will reduce the cost of housing by about half. My uncle did the same thing. I was in Tampa a couple of weeks ago visiting one of an apartment building that was built on his 3% mortgage. And what he was trying to do was get, after World War II, there's a 50-year period where we became the richest country in the world. And the American middle class became the greatest economic engine in the history of mankind. And a lot of that happened because we had destroyed the industrial base in Europe during the war, and ours was cranking. But the biggest factor was that we put every American into a home with the GI Bill and with all these other bills, and with the highway system that made land cheap. And once you own a home, you care about your community. You care about you go to the PTA meetings, you care about your schools, your police, your hospitals, your neighbors, the appearance of your home. And more importantly, you have an entree now to the American capitalist system, because if you own equity, you can borrow money, which means you can pursue your entrepreneurial impulses. And that's what happened after World War II. All of these Americans were in homes. They had an idea: I want to build a garage, I want to build a bowling alley, I want to build a movie theater, I want to build a restaurant. They were able to take a second mortgage on their home, and they were able to invest in their communities. We had this incredible ferment of economic activity, and we need to bring that back. When we turn, which BlackRock is trying to do to us, turn us from an ownership society into a society of renters, we go from being citizens to being subjects. And I'm going to change that. I'm also, there's a lot of people in your generation who are in trouble. They're on either addictive drugs, street drugs, or they're on SSRIs and benzos. And they're depressed, they're suicidal, they're alcoholic, they're addicted to other things, like you say, like video games. My Moonshot project, my Peace Corps project, is going to be creating wellness communities in rural areas and urban areas all over our country. And they're modeled on a community that I have a lot of experience with called San Padrinanos in Italy, which is a 500 acre, it's like a farm. It has a vineyard for 480 acres, but it has a bakery that makes the finest baked goods in Tuscany. It has a wine Butler, it has a furniture factory, it has a wallpaper factory, it has an apparel factory. And kids go there. The only thing, it's totally free. They have to make one commitment, which is to stay 5 years. And it's totally self-supporting because they're selling this stuff, and every kid that goes out is transformed, and they're all guaranteed jobs when they leave. I visited last week one that's modeled on San Patronato in the middle of Salt Lake. There's 300 convicts. They have to make a 2-year commitment. It's totally free. They run the biggest storage business in Utah. They run the biggest moving business in Utah. They run one of the biggest construction companies and the biggest thrift store in Utah. And they teach people, they reparent them in how to live in a community. They don't allow screens or TV, so they have to learn to start talking with each other. They learn to show up on time. And when they first started this place, no employers wanted to employ the people because they were ex-cons and drug addicts. And today, it's like the biggest employment agency in the state. Everybody, they have a whole list of corporations on their wall of people who are in line to hire their graduates because they're responsible. They're regarded as the best workers in Utah. Oh, I want to build those. Right now the biggest industry in rural areas in this country is prisons, and I'm going to put something else in those, which are these farms where people grow organic food, begin restoring their health, get rid of the screens for a couple of years, make a commitment to healing, and then provide jobs to that generation, in those places for starters. Yeah, to me, it's absolutely critical that doctors are in charge of their own medical decisions. I look at FDA and CDC and the agencies out of the business of being doctors and out of the medical business. And FDA, I'm going to end FDA's war against integrative medicine, against health, against public health. And, my major, I'd say, driver for running for office is to end the chronic disease epidemic in this country.
Did you guys like what you heard? Do me a favor. Do me a favor. Turn to the person next to you and just look at them for a second. Turn to the person behind you, look at them for a second. What do you see? What do you see? You see ordinary, average Americans. Mothers, fathers, doctors, small business owners. There's no big pharma in this room. There's no big tech. There's no big oil. There's no BlackRock. He's where he's at today at 15 million. You can't even buy a Super Bowl ad for 15 million. Can you imagine where he would be at 100 million, 200 million, a billion? You guys were kind enough to dip into your pockets during the holidays and donate, and I think it's money well spent. So with that, there is a QR code here. If you can donate again, do it. Everyone is allowed a max contribution of $6,600. I started a month ago with a $150 donation.